August 6th, and right now chaos has erupted in Sevastopol. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Neptune missiles are attacking Crimea. Hundreds killed. The target is burning military equipment.
Shot down! No, it exploded on its own. Fell, they missed it.
The remnants of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian armed forces are being destroyed. The Ukrainian armed forces are carrying out Russia's air defense system in Crimea feet first. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
You're such a joker.
Bada boom. And for an encore. The attempt by Russian occupiers to cross the Dnipro in the temporarily occupied part of Kherson region ended before it even began. All were destroyed.
Quiet! 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 Quiet!
The GUR, SBU, and Ukrainian armed forces are carrying out a brilliant special operation in Crimea, Moscow, the Moscow region, St. Petersburg, and Kaliningrad.
This is insane!
The GUR even reached Russia's Far East, setting off explosions. We'll discuss all of this with Roman Svita. Oh, it's coming. It's coming. Breaking news, friends, and this is sensational. The Kremlin is in a panic. Putin is urgently convening the Security Council because the GUR carried out a brilliant special operation in Moscow, the Moscow region, St. Petersburg, Crimea, and Kaliningrad. The remnants of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian armed forces have been destroyed. The attempt by Russian occupiers to cross the Dnipro in the temporarily occupied part of Kherson region ended very quickly, before it could even begin.
More Neptune missiles are attacking Crimea.
The determined and highly effective defense forces of Ukraine are currently engaged in systematically carrying out the destruction of Russia's sophisticated air defense systems located within the Crimean Peninsula. They are taking these systems out decisively, feet first, as a crucial and strategic preparatory measure for the eventual and complete deoccupation and liberation of the entire peninsula. Evacuation has begun on the peninsula. The line for the Crimean Bridge is enormous right now. Moreover, the GUR attacked an energy facility in Russia's Kaliningrad, leaving Russian defense industry enterprises without power. Ukrainian long-range kamikaze drones attacked the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan. Several factories are located there, including the production of Shahed drones, also known as Geran-2. And the Ukrainian armed forces attacked the Russian airbase in the Voronezh region. Everything is burning there. The Ukrainian armed forces also attacked Nevinomysky Azot in the Stavropol region, which is a factory, and in the Samara region of Russia, the Novokuybishevsk catalyst plant was attacked. It is part of the Rosneft structure. And a new video has appeared showing the crash of a Russian Su-25 near Soledar. It was friendly fire, as I understand it, shot down by another Russian aircraft. Let's discuss all this with the well-known military analyst, Roman Svita. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, what do you think about the special operation by the GUR? They are joining forces with the SBU and starting to carry out a series of actions. Kaliningrad near St. Petersburg, the Moscow region, Moscow. What do you think?
We once described these people with you, those who carry out this kind of work, the concerned ones. These are concerned people in Russia, ranging from Maltsev's partisans to the resistance forces of the republics who are trying to break free from Russian oppression and destroy this Russian prison of nations. They are working towards our victory as well. First and foremost, they are working for themselves, destroying the Russian economy, destroying Russian mechanisms, including military ones. And naturally, this helps us, and of course, we will absolutely stand up for them. And we thank our friends for this kind of work. Sometimes certain actions are carried out under the guidance of our special services, the Foreign Intelligence Service, the main intelligence directorate, the Security Service of Ukraine, and our Border Guard intelligence, which also takes part in these operations. So all these concerned individuals, sometimes regarding certain military targets, are overseen by our special services. That's why now there's a real wave sweeping across Russia, specifically connected to the destruction of the Russian oil and gas and oil industry. It's very easy to destroy it. Some of the concerned individuals simply set fire to forests through which the pipelines of Russian Gazprom or Naftogaz or whatever they're called run. And they just burn down. Pipelines burn, oil pumping stations burn, inspection hatches burn, so-called air vents, inlet and outlet manifolds at oil refineries all burn. So they're working very hard, powerfully, and even in enclaves, including by the GUR. At least the GUR boasted that in the Kaliningrad region, they took out a power installation, basically shut down, cut off power generation in that area. Well, I mean, good job, impressive. Obviously, it's unlikely that the GUR itself was directly involved. The task was probably carried out either by GUR's confidants or by concerned citizens. A huge thank you to them for that.
Friends, please like this video. Write a few kind words to our special services in the comments. This is very important for the armed forces of Ukraine and the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense. This is very important. And in the comments, let us know where you're watching from and write a few warm words in support of Ukraine. Roman Grigorievich, when we talk about Kaliningrad, how important is it to strike at Russia's military-industrial complex there, considering that a zone of turbulence could arise there?
Well, the Kaliningrad region is truly an exclave squeezed between two countries, Poland and Lithuania, up against the Baltic Sea. There is no direct connection with Russia at all. Through Belarus via the Suwalki corridor, it's about 100 kilometers. It's just not realistic. Of course, there are ferries running across the Baltic Sea, several of them departing from St. Petersburg with a few ferry crossings and several ship routes. And naturally, there are military vessels as well, meaning both civilian and military ships are around. But it's still an exclave, which makes it very difficult to defend. The Russians are well aware of this. And practically the entire exclave, the whole Kaliningrad region, König to be precise, meaning Kaliningrad, which is often called König. Even the people of Kaliningrad themselves understand perfectly well that it is, after all, a German city, Königsberg. That is, yes, there are still serious shipyards left there from Germany, from that war, from the last millennium, for the production of military vessels. So they still build them there, and some of them even end up with us, including in the Black Sea. Specifically, those produced there at those shipyards. A significant part of the Baltic fleet, of course, specifically the Russian Baltic fleet, is located there in Königsberg, in the Kaliningrad region, or let's just call it Königsberg. I like that better. And naturally, there's also aviation. A fairly large number of troops are stationed there. That's why it's very important for us, but not just for us. It's important, of course, first and foremost for the Baltic countries, and also for NATO, to limit the expansion of Russian military presence in this exclave. There are various mechanisms. Moreover, for example, right now we have the right, since Russia is the aggressor, we have the right to destroy any Russian military targets anywhere they may be located. It doesn't matter. At sea, on land, in the fourth dimension, in Antarctica, anywhere at all. A military target can be destroyed. And our special services can do this, and most likely are doing it. We've repeatedly said that operations are being carried out in Kaliningrad, and quite successfully.
Roman Grigorievich, brilliant news from temporarily occupied Crimea. First of all, Neptune missiles regularly strike there. They attack military bases and airfields. And now, Ukraine's defense forces are simply wiping out Russia's air defense system in Crimea. We are destroying this system, and everyone is saying that this is part of the preparation for the deoccupation of the peninsula, and now evacuation has begun on the peninsula. I checked just an hour ago. There were huge lines at the Kerch Bridge. What do you think about that?
Well, the thing is, any operation to deoccupy a territory will begin with an air attack. And any air attack starts with achieving air superiority, meaning the destruction of the enemy's air defense. First the ground-based systems, and then naturally the aerial ones. And right now we're actually witnessing the beginning of this operation. Although, to be honest, from a military perspective, it's a rather weak start. Look, every week we talk about something flying over Crimea. They took something out here, something out there. There's no systematic approach to the work. What does a systematic approach mean? It means every day, every night, ideally at night, so that fewer civilians suffer, regardless of whether they're Russian civilians or our own steadfast Ukrainians who are there. We don't target civilians. It's very important for us to protect civilians from direct strikes, and then, preferably at night, to hit military targets, anti-aircraft missile systems, and enemy military facilities. But this needs to be done properly and skillfully. However, the frequency is still insufficient. This should be happening every night. But right now it's only happening once a week or even once every couple of weeks. That's far too little. As for this issue, if, for example, we're talking about the Neptunes, Neptune is a so-called cruise missile system, which is currently overseen by Nij Papa, that is the commander of the Ukrainian Navy, the naval forces of Ukraine. He should have an entire unit or a dedicated division focused on the liberation of Crimea. In fact, it should be our naval forces that are responsible for the liberation of Crimea. That's the optimal approach. Within their structure, there should be a specific branch of the military. We've talked about this so many times already. It was a bit of a mistake to create a general branch for unmanned systems forces. Instead, their own unmanned systems forces should be established within the Navy, within the naval forces, so that they can operate underwater drones, surface drones, and aerial drones, plus the same Neptunes. Neptune, let me repeat, is a missile of a coastal missile system which is directly subordinate to the Navy. And so a sufficient number of forces and assets of this level, plus it is absolutely necessary for the Navy to be given command of at least one squadron of, say, Mirages. For example, Mirages as naval aviation to operate against maritime targets and ground targets in Crimea. And then this process will set a task for the Navy. Here is your area of responsibility. Assign them the liberation of Crimea so that they focus solely on Crimea and nothing else. Our sailors should be engaged in the liberation of Crimea, and then it will become a planned, systematic effort, daily and nightly work to drive out the Russian spirit from Crimea. If this systematic work begins, those lines you mentioned at the Kerch Bridge, believe me, remember, we talked about swimming, crawl, breaststroke, and dog paddle. That's the optimal scenario, because not everyone will be able to cross the Kerch Bridge.
Roman Grigorievich, while preparing for our interview, I noted the occupiers lack sufficient air defense systems, yet they concentrate them in Crimea. This is due to their fear of a Ukrainian offensive, claims Vladislav Selesnev, a Crimean native and former spokesperson of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The occupiers believe in a possible amphibious landing from the sea, which is why for the third year they've built engineering fortifications along the coastlines of the Chernomorsky, Yevpatoria, and Simferopol districts. This line of defense is destroyed by storms every year, but they keep restoring it again and again. This only means one thing. The occupiers are not confident in Crimea's defensive capability. What do you think? That was a quote?
Believe me, I once served back in the Soviet Union. I started out in the Soviet Army. This is a bit of a different task. It's like when there's nothing to do, they assign some task just to keep the personnel busy. Look, there are several tens of thousands of Russian troops in Crimea. They really have nothing to do there. Well, they can use binoculars to spy on girls at the beach. That's about it. And so to keep such foolish thoughts out of their heads, they give them shovels and assign them to dig up Crimea back and forth, knowing full well that the first storm will just cover up everything they've dug. Then they're given the same task again, and once more they dig everything up back and forth. Back in the Soviet Union, they used to paint leaves and yellowed grass green. Well, that's what they call the connection between space and time. You pick up a shovel and dig a trench from lunchtime until dinner. The connection between space and time, so that's basically how it goes. It's exactly the same picture here. It's pointless work, but it keeps the Russian troops occupied with at least some kind of task, so they keep busy. Basically, it's all for a general strategic objective. That's right. But the thing is, an amphibious landing in Crimea is only possible after we liberate Skadovsk. And as for a landing in Crimea, it's 50 kilometers from Skadovsk to Crimea, 50 kilometers to Skadovsk. Well, if you start from somewhere around Hola Pristan, for example, and begin an operation to liberate Crimea, a ground operation, then you already need to cross to the left bank to land troops or to force the Dnipro moving in the direction of Skadovsk. But from Skadovsk to Crimea, it's 50 kilometers by sea. Believe me, boats can make it in an hour and a half, 2 hours. That's when a real threat will arise, truly. Right now, the Russians do face a threat. They understand this perfectly well if there is an airborne landing. But against an airborne landing by helicopters or planes, you won't be able to dig any defensive positions. They'll just fly right over them, that's all. So for now, to sum it up, what are the Russians doing? They're just wasting their time. That's basically it, building these fortification structures. Let them dig after all. You could say it's good for their health.
Roman Grigorievich, Yuri Butusov posted a video and wrote that there was an attempt by Russian occupiers to cross the Dnipro in the temporarily occupied part of Kherson region, but it ended before it even began. They were all destroyed. Please give us your assessment.
Such attacks have been happening every day for the past several months, and there are several attacks per day. Not all of them make it into the video stream. And Yuri Butusov is a competent military journalist. He was back in the day, and now he is fighting. So he can create such video footage, and we owe him a big thank you for that. Why? Because he's the man has been fighting since 2012, or at least since 2014, so he knows things very well. His way of presenting material is very concise and to the point, but once again, I'll repeat, there are several such attacks per day, and this has been going on for several months in a row. The Russian left bank group has been tasked with carrying out harassing strikes on the right bank. In other words, it's an attempt to gain a foothold somewhere on the right bank. First, they try step by step to take full control of the islands, especially in the lower reaches of the Dnipro. Every island, we go over them thoroughly, inside and out. Drones and our artillery, sometimes aviation. So along this direction, roughly from the Kinhurka spit to Kakhovka, along the left bank, the Russians are constantly trying to break through to the right bank. They know perfectly well that it's a one-way ticket. Not every bird can make it to the middle of the Dnipro, if anyone remembers. It's the same story here. Not every Russian even dares to try to swim to the middle of the Dnipro. Whether it's freestyle, breaststroke, or doggy paddle, they try to swim back the other way if they survive after their boat gets destroyed, the boat they were trying to use to cross to the right bank.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Roman Grigorievich, let's move on to our favorite segment, explosions on Russian territory. So, Ukrainian long-range kamikaze drones attacked the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan. There are factories there, including the production of Shahed drones, also known as Geran-2. What do you think?
The Geran-2, which is also widely known as the Podsolnuk 200, is a significant drone. But this crucial point needs to be clearly and thoroughly understood, because when people mistakenly say that the Geran-2 is exactly the same as the Shahed, let me emphatically tell you this. In the Geran-2s, there is not a single component of Iranian origin whatsoever. Why? Because after disassembling all these Gerans that come to us, either the components are made by Progress, which is a Russian company, mostly electronics, or they're all Chinese, the majority is Chinese. Some components and assemblies are old French, old American ones. You can now buy a kilo of them at flea markets for just 1 hryvnia. They're also used in these. And the carbon fiber body is Russian, plus there are some so-called parachute systems for recovery, which are Belarusian from Belavia. So in Vitebsk, there's a factory, and some of those drones that are designed to return, the so-called reconnaissance drones, use Belarusian parachutes specifically. That's why the Geran-2 is a Chinese, Russian, Belarusian version with a mix of French and American parts. There's absolutely nothing Iranian in it. That's why we need to stop calling it Shahed and start referring to it specifically as Russian-Chinese production. Why am I clarifying this, or rather, why am I emphasizing this point? Because those Israeli airstrikes on Iranian factories on the production of Shaheds will have no impact whatsoever on the production of Gerans from Chinese components. These are now two completely different manufacturing processes. After Kazavshan was elected president of Iran, he turned out to be a rather pro-European politician, at least in his orientation. After his election, Russia has not received any military assistance from Iran on our side. There are no Iranian missiles. Not a single Iranian missile has been launched at Ukrainian territory. Ask anyone you like. Not a single Iranian one. There were Korean ones. There were Chinese, old Soviet ones, I mean Russian. There were no Iranian ones. And there haven't been any Shaheds for a long time now. Maybe under the old president, under Stark, there were some connections at least. Now it's purely Chinese. What am I saying? Even if you completely destroy all Shahed production in Iran, the production of gerans will not stop. And in order to destroy the production of gerans, our armed forces are doing the right thing. They are destroying the assembly plants now, currently in Alabuga, and soon they should reach Izhevsk. The Chinese have already built a plant in Izhevsk as well. And now the Chinese are building a plant to produce something like Sharan 4s or 5s or whatever they end up calling them, Shenzhou or something like that, it doesn't matter, in North Korea. Right next door, in fact, there are several hundred kilometers of shared border between China and North Korea. And between North Korea and Russia, think of it as the Far Eastern Ukrainian People's Republic. Vladivostok is right there, Zelyoniklin, and it's just a few dozen kilometers along the Tumanaya River. So all of the various drones that are currently coming at us are either of Russian or Chinese manufacture, such as those very same gerans that we have seen before, or they are still of a distinct Israeli origin, perhaps even from older models. At one time, Israel built a factory in Russia for producing heavy reconnaissance drones, heavy unmanned aerial vehicles, which they still use to this day, including the fact that the same Lancet is actually an Israeli Heron 400. That's why there are problems with perceiving this whole reality at the moment. Nothing Iranian is flying at us, so all the strikes on Iran bring us absolutely nothing. But what we do need to destroy are Chinese, Korean, and Russian assets. The more the better. The strike was actually not bad for a first attempt. They tried to drop an aerial bomb on Alabuga, and this is our drone. Or rather, it's our light aircraft converted into a drone, the so-called A-22 Aeropract, which is now learning to drop aerial bombs. Well, they say it's a 250-kilogram bomb, but that's unlikely because such a heavy bomb would be hard to carry far. I think it's a 100-kilogram one, the so-called FAB-100. That is, it wasn't a precise hit. They didn't hit the building. The aerial bomb landed on the lot, meaning the parking area for vehicles, at least those belonging to the workers of this plant, who are directly involved in assembling these gerans. I think about a dozen Chinese workers, to put it mildly, were scared out of their wits after this strike. I don't know if they'll go back to China or not, but I think this won't be the last strike.
Roman Grigorievich, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked the occupiers' airbase in the Voronezh region. There's video of the impact, everything is on fire. What could have been targeted there? So tactical aviation of the enemy, fuel, the runway.
Well, that's probably Buturlinovka. So most likely, yes, it was a strike. Yes, there was a strike on the airfield. There is Russian tactical aviation station there. It's a forward airfield for army aviation, for Russian helicopters, and there are depots, transit ones, so to speak. And of course, the main thing is the airfield's technical equipment of all levels, at least the ground equipment, plus fuel and lubricant storage facilities. Where was the strike directed? Well, there is already confirmation. The General Staff has confirmed that the strike was successful at least. So this is the systematic work of our armed forces to destroy Russian military facilities.
Roman Grigorievich, we need to attack enemy military airfields, fuel, runways, and both tactical and strategic aviation every night, or at least several times a week. Is that correct? So that it would be truly effective.
It's about systematic work. If there is no system, the Russians have time to repair everything, and it brings us no benefit at all. On the contrary, it does more harm when drones are simply written off. Systematic action depends on whether there is aviation at a particular airfield, on the use of engineering services, that is, special engineering units for preparing missiles and equipment. Our intelligence knows all of this. So, when there is a planned approach to the work, and right now we can see that the work is indeed being done according to a plan. Every day, every night, every other day, we go on air with you, and we talk specifically about the planned operations of our army. Now it's the armed forces that are involved in this, not the special services. The armed forces have started systematic work to destroy military targets. And here it's also essential to add that we must resume the destruction of Russian oil refineries. Any Russian oil refinery is a legitimate military target since it produces diesel, gasoline, and aviation kerosene for the Russian army.
Roman Grigorievich, last night the Oriol region was attacked. I watched a huge number of videos from there. What military facilities are located there? What could have been hit by the armed forces of Ukraine?
Well, according to the information provided, at least by Russian public channels, everything was being shot down over the oil refinery. So we hope We'll confirm this next time. For now, the General Staff hasn't confirmed anything. We hope that finally that this was the Army's work. In other words, there's no hope for the special services anymore. The sanctions of Malyuk and Budanov have fizzled out, the ones that were previously related to strikes on oil refineries. Well, guys, you went in the wrong direction, as they say, you gave up. Now, there is hope that our armed forces, specifically the Ukrainian army, are starting to strike oil refineries as well. This is very important for us. Why? We are accomplishing two tasks. First, we are bleeding the Russian army dry, not allowing them to receive fuel for movement, aviation kerosene for aircraft flights. Second, it's about the Russian military economy, because Russians get $1/3 of $1 trillion from their oil and gas industry, $1/3 of $1 trillion. Now they're going to get about twice as much. Why? Because the little war in the Middle East, started by Israel, will give the Russian oil industry a chance to double its profits. And that's going to come back to haunt us. Then we'll be hit with North Korean KN-23s, and those frail, dying North Koreans will show up again, the ones Putin will buy with those petrodollars. So this will be a problem for us, because in order to prevent it, to protect our soldiers and all of Ukraine from Russian airstrikes, we need to destroy the hydrocarbons, burn them down to zero, completely wipe them out. So right now, just think about it. The Ukrainian army actually needs to help Russian partisans destroy the Russian hydrocarbon industry. Can you imagine what we've come to with all these dances around the campfire? Only it's not clear with what.
Drones attacked Nevinomysky Azot, a plant in the Stavropol region, and in Russia's Samara region, the Novokuybishevsk catalyst plant was attacked. It is part of the Rosneft structure. Roman Grigorievich?
These are chemical plants, so-called chemical industry plants. Both of them produced additives. There are certain additives for aviation kerosene, some for increasing, say, density or for temperature. There are a lot of chemical materials that are produced only in the chemical industry. These are purely military facilities because their products are used, for example, in the production of carbon fiber for the Guerrilla 2. So naturally, it is necessary to destroy both the production of the same Guerrilla drones in Alabuga and also to destroy the production of this carbon fiber or additives for carbon fiber at chemical plants in Russia. This is also systematic work. I want to emphasize this once again. Finally, planned operations have begun. This is clearly the chief of the general staff. This is NATO at work. In other words, the new chief of the general staff is doing an excellent job. You can already feel the systematic approach in the work of our long-range strike capabilities.
Roman Grigorievich, a video has appeared showing the crash of a Russian Su-25 near Soledar. Everyone is saying that it was most likely shot down by another Russian aircraft. What do you think? As I understand it, these plane crashes have been happening quite often to the Russians lately, right?
Well, there are many reasons, especially the Su-25s, these 40-year-old grandpas that still seem to be carrying out combat missions. We fly them too. They're not bad planes. They're actually quite stable. But when flying in pairs, well, they can fall apart on their own just by themselves. But when flying in pairs, especially when firing in pairs, what I noticed is that you can't shoot the way they did. The thing is, the wingman almost shot down the lead aircraft, and he wasn't even aiming at him. The thing is, they were firing NERs, so-called unguided rockets. Unguided aerial rockets, also called NERs. Well, we call them NERs. So when the wingman fires NERs, if, for example, the stabilizers on the rocket don't deploy, even if just one fails to open, it immediately veers off course. And most likely what happened was that one of these rockets with an undeployed stabilizer struck the lead aircraft. In other words, they just rushed things. The wingman rushed to fire off his rockets, and he should have waited until the lead aircraft moved aside. Only after that should he have fired. But as it turned out, he basically fired almost simultaneously with the lead. So this is a matter of technique. These are errors in piloting technique and mistakes in combat application in this case. And most importantly, as we've already discussed, well, what kind of fool flies on Friday the 13th? Go ahead, find one. Well, there you go. One fool flew, or maybe two.
I apologize. So does this really matter to pilots? Seriously now, no jokes? These dates, Fridays, are you being serious or is this just trolling on your part?
Not at all. It really matters a lot to pilots. Pilots will go out of their way to avoid a black cat, especially when they head into the airfield. On the 13th, as far as I remember, we used to fly. No one flew on the 13th. That was our payday. And there were no aircraft with the number 13. There were no call signs with 13. For example, my call sign was 00057, 00057, but there was never a 00013. In other words, such call signs simply didn't exist. So this isn't trolling, not at all. This is exactly the kind of problem that society introduces even into pilots' decision-making. Sometimes it's a matter of split seconds. And this really is about split seconds. And when it's not even about saving someone, but about making decisions by the flight crew, sometimes just this kind of hesitation on the 13th day, or simply taking off on the 13th, or on board number 13, or with call sign 13, already puts a person's mind into a different mode, especially if they're superstitious. All pilots are superstitious.
Roman Grigorievich, you and I always assess the situation very professionally. You never let emotions take over, and I would like us to approach the next piece of information from a military perspective, professionally. So, a huge number of American media outlets are now suddenly starting to report. These are being quoted by Ukrainian Telegram channels. I would like everything to be without panic. So, the Washington Post is quoting Ukrainian sources. Sumy will be wiped off the face of the earth if Russia advances 10 or 15 kilometers into the city. In this case, enemy artillery will be brought into Sumy. There are only 5 kilometers left until this threat. I read this news this morning in all the Telegram channels. I would like our audience to have calm confidence in our armed forces of Ukraine. Please assess this information soberly and give your evaluation to our dear respected audience.
Well, the significant thing is, Sumy is indeed a very large city. It comprehensively covers a very expansive and considerable geographical area. To wipe it off the face of the earth, well, regular army artillery is not enough. That is, if you want to wipe Sumy off the face of the earth, you would need heavy bombers to come in and drop hundreds of free-falling aerial bombs. If you've seen footage, for example, of the bombing of Dresden in the last century, that's about what it would look like. There's simply no other way. You can't wipe a city off the face of the earth with artillery, especially not regular army artillery. So whenever this kind of position starts to come up somewhere, you have to ask, why even spread this nonsense? First of all, army artillery is clear-cut. It really is dangerous within its operational depth, meaning within the effective range of army artillery. What is the effective range of army artillery? The range is 15 kilometers mainly, 15 kilometers. And artillery isn't always positioned right at the line of contact. Sometimes it's set back 5 or 10 kilometers. So, in order for army artillery to wipe Sumy off the map, they'd have to move along the front through Sumy together with the artillery. Look at them, for example, messing around in Vovchansk right now, wiping it out, no questions there. But Vovchansk is several times smaller than Sumy, and they've been messing around there for a second year now. That's one. Second, getting close to Sumy is very difficult. Why are the Russians running around in the Sumy area right now? Because they're still wandering around across meadows, across fields in the open. They haven't reached the forests or the tree lines yet. That is, our main fortified areas are in the forests and tree lines. I mean, what kind of fool would dig a defensive fortification out in the open field, knowing full well that you'll definitely get hit there, because you stand out like a Christmas tree? But right now, the Russians are out in the fields, and we're taking them out in the fields by the dozens, by the company, every day in that direction. So at the moment, Sumy is absolutely not under any threat at this moment. For Sumy to actually be threatened, the Russians would have to send another 50 to 70,000 troops there. Right now, it's simply impossible for them to come up with those numbers out of nowhere. The main question is, why would they even do that? There's this concept called strategic perspective. So there is absolutely no strategic perspective for advancing on Sumy. An advance on Kyiv is 300 kilometers. They've been crawling from Luhansk to Pokrovsk for 11 years. That's 160 kilometers. If you apply that pace to Kyiv, how long would it take them to get there? 24 years. And that's in the best of times for the Russians, making their way from Luhansk to Pokrovsk. So there is absolutely no strategic perspective whatsoever. Right now, what's happening in the Sumy area is the creation of a front line, and sometimes we're even the ones initiating the creation of this front line. This is very important for us. We need to establish a front line between Ukraine and Russia so that there isn't another incursion into Chernihiv, Sumy, or Kyiv. And before Kyiv, there are still Nedry Hailev, Priluki, Novy Bikiv, Basan, Brovary. I'm just recalling these from the map approximately. So to prevent this, we need to establish a front line in the north. A northern front needs to be created, and right now it's being formed on both sides. Now, any further movement by the Russians in the Sumy area will be similar to what happened in Kharkiv. The Kharkiv grouping there was much stronger. They got stuck in Lipsy near Kharkiv and got stuck in Vovchansk. The same thing will happen here near Sumy, where they're currently milling around. They'll just be taken out in those fields where they're now running around like rabbits. And in reality, they're being eliminated in droves. We just need to reinforce that area. Well, maybe reinforce it based on the list of losses. That's all that needs to be done in that direction, nothing more.
Dear audience, Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week on my YouTube channel, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So please support us by liking this video. In the comments, please write a few kind words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine, Ukraine itself, and also let us know where you're watching from. We work for an audience all over the world so that people know the truth about Russian aggression, about Russia's war against Ukraine. That's why every comment you leave, every like you give is priceless. And please, I am grateful to you for that.